Imagine, 1973, the British Grand Prix. 30 cars are on the Formula One starting grid, and every single one of them, absolutely every one, is equipped with the same engine. This wasn't a science fiction scenario. This was absolute domination. This engine, the Ford-Cosworth DFV, didn't just win races, it changed motorsport forever. In this video, we'll reveal how engineering genius created it, how it democratized Formula One, allowing private teams to compete for victories, and how its unique design literally revolutionized the world of racing chassis. Watch until the end, and you'll learn the history of the most successful engine in Formula One history. A history that proves that true revolution is born not within factory walls, but on the racetrack. The tension in the air of Formula One in the mid-60s was palpable. You could literally cut it with a knife. Races were spectacular, but under the hood, a crisis was brewing, felt by every mechanic and driver. Existing engines, whether bulky, heavy V12s or less reliable but still capricious V8s, simply couldn't cope with the constantly growing demands for speed and endurance. They were not only heavy, but also required incredible chassis rigidity, which wasn't always achievable without compromising handling. Something fundamentally new, groundbreaking, was needed. Something capable not just of moving the car, but of becoming its integral, optimized part. But who would dare to take this risky step? It was at this moment that a man with one of the sharpest and most far-sighted minds in motorsport history stepped onto the stage. Colin Chapman, founder of the legendary Lotus team. Chapman was not just a designer and engineer, he was a true visionary, capable of looking far ahead, anticipating how Formula One should evolve. He understood that to achieve a new level of performance, what was needed was not just another engine, but something revolutionary that would change the very architecture of the racing car. In 1966, driven by his unwavering conviction, he persuaded Ford UK to finance an unprecedented project. The sum was substantial for that time, a full £100,000 sterling, and it was earmarked for a small but extraordinarily talented and ambitious engineering firm, Cosworth Engineering, which had already made a name for itself in junior formulas. At the helm of Cosworth was a true genius whose name is forever etched in gold letters in motorsport history, Keith Duckworth. It was he and his team who were tasked with bringing Chapman's dream to life. Duckworth faced a daunting challenge: to create an engine capable not only of delivering record power, but also of becoming an integral, stressed part of the chassis, bearing structural loads. Initially, a V6 option was considered, seeming a logical choice for its compactness. But Duckworth, with his characteristic uncompromising nature and engineering meticulousness, quickly rejected this idea. His brilliant intuition and precise mathematical calculation pointed him to the only correct solution: a 90-degree V8. Why precisely a V8? It was all about its optimal balance. This configuration provided the ideal equilibrium between stable power, exceptional compactness, and minimal vibration. In Duckworth's hands, every element was subservient to functionality, and his 90-degree V8 promised to become not just a power unit, but the integrated heart of the car, opening up unprecedented possibilities for designing light and rigid chassis. Months of intense work, thousands of calculations, countless tests, and refinements culminated in triumph and a deafening roar. In April 1967, the first ever Ford-Cosworth DFV, which stands for double four valve, roared to life on the Cosworth test bench, and its thunderous birth surpassed even the engineers' wildest expectations. The power was higher than predicted, and the sound was pure, untamed energy, promising imminent domination. Everyone understood. This was not just an engine, It was the beginning of a new, incredible era in Formula One. But impressive figures on a test bench are one thing, and a real race, where fractions of a second decide everything, is quite another. The culmination came on June 4, 1967, at the Dutch Grand Prix. With the new DFV hidden under the hood of the elegant Lotus 49, the legendary Graham Hill took to the Zandvoort track and captured pole position on his very first attempt. This wasn't just a good result. It was a stunning, resounding debut that left the entire paddock in awe, and competitors realizing that the rules of the game had changed forever. The new engine didn't just perform. It dominated from the very first lap, demonstrating incredible power and reliability. Just 2 weeks later, on June 18, 1967, the world of Formula One witnessed a truly historic moment. At the British Grand Prix, on the Silverstone circuit, home to Lotus and Cosworth, the legendary Jim Clark, masterfully driving his Lotus 49, equipped with the same new DFV, achieved its first victory. It was only the engine's second race, and it already stood atop the podium. The DFV's instant and uncompromising competitiveness was declared loud and clear. The revolution had begun, and its thunderous roar echoed across all racetracks worldwide, foreshadowing decades of domination. But to truly dominate, the DFV had to become more than just a powerful engine for one team. Ford and Cosworth knew this, and in 1968, they made a decision that changed Formula One forever. They made the DFV available for purchase by other Formula One teams for just $7,500. This was an unprecedented step, a kind of bold challenge. Factory teams were accustomed to their exclusive, exorbitantly expensive engines, available only to them, which gave them a huge advantage. And here, $7,500. At that time, it was comparable to the cost of a decent house, but in the world of royal racing, where every component cost astronomical sums, it was a price that even private teams could afford. This decision undermined the monopoly of the factory giants and truly democratized the sport, making speed accessible to a much wider range of participants. The results were immediate. Already in 1968, Graham Hill, driving the Lotus 49 with the DFV, won the World Championship title, confirming the new engine's instant and undeniable competitiveness. But this was just the beginning of a true revolution. The most striking example of this democratization of speed happened the very next year, 1969. That's when the Briton Jackie Stewart, driving the Matra MS-80, a non-factory team, became world champion. This was a landmark moment. For the first time in Formula One history, a driver won the main title with a DFV engine, but he wasn't driving for Lotus. This clearly proved the DFV shattered the monopoly of the privileged few and opened the doors to the top even for small but talented teams. The paddock came alive. Suddenly, teams that were barely making ends meet yesterday could not only participate, but genuinely fight for points, for podiums, and sometimes even for victories. This was the golden age of private teams, where the talent of engineers and the skill of drivers could shine brighter than the budgets of automotive giants. The boring predictability disappeared from the battlefields, giving way to thrilling competition, new names, and an unprecedented level of rivalry, all made possible by the Ford-Cosworth DFV. But it wasn't just its accessibility that made the DFV revolutionary. Its engineering concept was no less innovative and profoundly impacted the very architecture of racing cars. Before the DFV, Formula One engines were typically massive, heavy, separate units that were simply bolted to the rear of the existing monocoque chassis. Essentially, the monocoque was a self-sufficient, fully load-bearing structure, while the engine was considered merely attached equipment that added weight and required additional, sometimes cumbersome, mountings. But Keith Duckworth, Cosworth's ingenious engineer, conceived the DFV fundamentally differently. He designed it as a stressed member of the chassis. The engine was to become an integral part of the car's structure itself, its spine, rather than just an additional unit. The monocoque ended right behind the cockpit, and the DFV engine, with its incredibly strong cast block, itself bore the load from the rear suspension and transmission. Imagine your spine suddenly becoming your heart and lungs simultaneously, and at the same time becoming stronger and lighter. This allowed designers to create lighter, stiffer, and more compact cars. The need for heavy subframes and additional stiffening elements was eliminated. The DFV itself served this purpose, becoming the central, load-bearing element of the car's rear, connecting the cockpit to the transmission and rear axle. It significantly simplified and lightened the rear of the car, opening up previously unseen possibilities for aerodynamic design. This concept, where the engine is a load-bearing element, forever changed the philosophy of chassis design in Formula One. It ushered in an era of innovation in aerodynamics and weight distribution as engineers gained much more freedom. Cars became lower, more streamlined, and their handling reached a fundamentally new level. Thus, the DFV didn't just provide power, it changed the game. It democratized the sport, making speed accessible to many, and simultaneously orchestrated an engineering revolution, redefining the very architecture of racing cars. From then on, Formula One was no longer a club of the chosen few, but a battlefield where anyone with a DFV could contend for victory. And this was just the beginning of its legendary journey. The DFV's path to absolute domination unfolded rapidly, like a supernova explosion that didn't fade, but only grew brighter. After its debut and initial triumphant victories with Lotus, the engine, like an invisible force, began to conquer Formula One pit lanes. Already in 1968, Graham Hill brought the first driver's title to the Lotus 49, equipped with this 8-cylinder heart. But the real, fundamental turning point occurred when Ford, displaying unprecedented foresight, made the DFV available for purchase by any team for a modest $7,500. This was a move that didn't just change the sport, it literally reformatted it. Suddenly, small independent teams, previously condemned to merely filling the starting grid, gained access to the same winning power as the established giants. The sport wasn't just democratized, it became a field where a driver's skill and a constructor's genius could fully flourish, having equal opportunities under the hood. Already in 1969, Jackie Stewart proved this to the world, winning the championship title in the Matra MS-80, a car unrelated to Lotus, but under whose hood beat the same fiery, victorious DFV heart. This was the first championship won with a DFV by a team that was not the original developer. In subsequent years, this would become the norm. The secret to its astonishing success lay not only in its inherent power and phenomenal reliability, but also in its truly ingenious design. Keith Duckworth succeeded in creating not just an engine, but a structural element of the chassis. The DFV was designed to bear significant loads, essentially becoming part of the monocoque, a kind of spine for the car. This allowed engineers to create radically lighter, stiffer, and more compact cars, freeing them from the need for bulky frames. Such an innovation fundamentally changed the approach to designing racing cars, transforming the Formula One car into a single, indivisible, and incredibly efficient organism. The result was staggering. From the early 1970s, the DFV began to dominate on tracks with such indisputability that it bordered on a monopoly. Every new team, every promising constructor sought to acquire this V8. It was the gold standard, the only ticket to the podium and to victory. And this era of absolute supremacy reached its culminating apex in 1973 at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Imagine this truly unique scene. A hot summer day, the roar of thousands of fans, teams preparing for the start. Tension hangs over the pit lane. The sound of engines swells, transforming into a single, deafening roar. And then, the breathtaking realization: absolutely every single one of the 25 cars lined up on the starting grid, from the leaders to the tailenders, was equipped with a Ford-Cosworth DFV V8. This was an unprecedented, unique occurrence in Formula One history. 100% domination across the entire field. It was not merely eloquent proof of its phenomenal reliability and unsurpassed performance. It was a manifesto of its versatility. The DFV was so perfect and accessible that there simply was no viable alternative on the F1 horizon to compete with it. But Cosworth and Ford's ambitions were not limited to European Grand Prix races. The power and uncompromising reliability of the DFV were too valuable to remain within the confines of a single racing series. Their gaze turned west. In 1975, Cosworth engineers took the next logical step, developing the DFX variant, a turbocharged version of the legendary V8, specifically designed for American IndyCar races. This was not just an adaptation, but a profound reinterpretation of the engine for entirely different conditions. Long, high-speed ovals required not only monstrous power, but also the ability to sustain it throughout the race distance, which was much more challenging for naturally aspirated engines. And the DFX did not disappoint. Its debut at the Indianapolis 500 in the same year, 1975, was a true triumph. It brought victory in America's most prestigious race, making its presence known as loudly as possible. This was not just a success, but the beginning of a new, decade-long era of absolute domination. Over the next decade, the DFX literally conquered American racing series. It became synonymous with victory on ovals, winning titles and races, one after another, for many years to come. From 1978 to 1987, every Indy 500 winner used a DFX. The adaptability with which the fundamental DFV design was transformed into the powerful turbocharged DFX underscored the genius and foresight of the original project. It was created with such a margin of strength and such a well-thought-out architecture that it could be adapted for any racing challenge, from twisty European tracks to high-speed American ovals. The golden age of the DFV was not just a peak. It was a full era when one engine reigned on both sides of the Atlantic, proving its undisputed power, versatility, and unbreakable superiority. Suddenly, by the late 70s, the DFV's perfect world trembled. A new, daunting technology appeared on the Formula One horizon, threatening to shatter the dominance of naturally aspirated engines: turbocharging. The ambitious Renault team became the pioneer with its innovative RS Row 1, soon followed by the mighty Ferrari. Their turbocharged engines, initially not very reliable, demonstrated explosive, almost uncontrollable power, especially in qualifying sessions. Imagine the DFV, delivering its stable 480-500 horsepower, suddenly facing competitors who, on a single lap, could extract up to 600 or even 700. This was pure, brute force, capable of literally throwing cars forward on straight sections, leaving naturally aspirated engines in the dust. Teams with turbo engines often used special qualifying engines that were tuned for extreme power outputs at the cost of immense wear, literally on the verge of destruction. This created an unfair advantage on the starting grid, and suddenly, after a decade of undeniable supremacy, the DFV found itself playing catch-up. But Cosworth engineers, led by Keith Duckworth, were not ones to give up without a fight. They understood that the DFV, in its classic form, was beginning to fall behind. The answer came in 1982 in the form of the DFY. the last, most refined incarnation of the legendary engine. The DFY was not just an evolution, it was a desperate attempt to extract the maximum from the naturally aspirated concept. The main change was a significantly shortened piston stroke, which allowed the engine's RPM to increase from the DFV's usual 10,000 to a dizzying 11,000 or even 11,500 revolutions per minute. With every additional revolution came additional horsepower. This was an engine tuned for peak power, ready to fight turbocharging with its own weapon, speed. The 1982 season became the apogee of this struggle. It was the year when turbo engines had already firmly established themselves in the paddock, but the DFV had not yet said its last word. On the tracks, a true confrontation of technologies and ideas unfolded. The wild, unpredictable power of turbos against the refined reliability, drivability, and fuel efficiency of naturally aspirated engines. It was under these conditions that Finnish driver Keke Rosberg, racing for the Williams team, shone. His Williams FW08 was equipped with a DFV, not a fashionable turbo. Rosberg embodied the spirit of the DFV, aggressive yet pragmatic. He knew how to extract every drop of potential from his car, using its superior handling and stability in corners to compensate for the deficit on straights. In that incredibly close season, where 7 different drivers from 7 different teams became winners, Rosberg showed incredible consistency. He only achieved 1 victory, but his consistent finishes on the podium and in the points zone allowed him, despite the clear advantage of turbocharged cars in raw speed, to win the championship title. This victory was truly historic. Keke Rosberg's championship in 1982 with the DFV-powered Williams FW08 is more than just statistics. It was the last, most brilliant triumph of a naturally aspirated engine in the fight for the ultimate Formula One title in the era of impending turbocharging dominance. It proved that even as technology had advanced significantly, the fundamental genius and potential of the DFV remained relevant. This engine, born in 1967, could still lead a champion to victory 15 years later, demonstrating its longevity and incredible adaptability. This was the DFV's swan song at the pinnacle of the world. And although it was the DFV's swan song at the pinnacle of the world, the impending turbo era was already beginning to dictate its terms. An invisible yet ruthless adversary for the naturally aspirated giant was not only competing engines, but also new, stringent regulations that the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, or FIA, methodically introduced, trying to curb the growing power of turbocharged monsters. By 1983, when Renault and Ferrari turbos already reigned supreme in qualifying and were increasingly winning races, the FIA made a decision that seemed designed to level the playing field. A strict limit was introduced: no more than 100 kilograms of fuel for the entire race. Ostensibly, this rule was aimed at fuel-guzzling turbo engines, capable of generating insane power, but consuming fuel by the tank load. However, this blow unintentionally hit the Ford-Cosworth DFV as well. Yes, it was reliable and relatively fuel-efficient for a naturally aspirated engine, but compared to the new turbo engines, its relative fuel inefficiency became critical. Now, teams using the DFV found themselves at a distinct disadvantage. They had to either sacrifice power to reach the finish line or risk running out of fuel. The irony of fate, it was in 1983 in Detroit that Michele Alboreto, driving a Tyrrell, secured the 155th and, as it turned out, last victory for the Ford-Cosworth DFV in Formula One. It was the final bright surge of a legend already feeling the pressure of new regulations. 1984 brought even stricter limitations. The maximum fuel tank capacity was reduced, further marginalizing naturally aspirated engines. For the DFV, which already had to fight for every kilogram of fuel. This was almost a death sentence. Teams one by one began switching to turbocharged units, realizing that in the long run, the DFV had no future in the championship fight. Its unique combination of power, reliability, and accessibility, which had ensured its hegemony for a decade and a half, now simply could not compete with the unrestrained power of turbo engines that produced over 1,000 horsepower. The culmination of this decline came in 1986. Ford-Cosworth, the company that gave the world the DFV, was forced to acknowledge the inevitable. It shifted its primary focus in Formula One, introducing its own turbocharged V6 engine, the GBA. This decision effectively signaled the end of factory support for DFV-derived engines in the top echelon of Formula One. It wasn't just the DFV's departure, it was its creator's departure from the naturally aspirated era to which it had been tied for so long. The final farewell chord sounded in 1988. Then, in one of the last Grand Prix races of the season, a car equipped with a direct descendant of the DFV took to the grid. This was the last time the legendary V8, albeit in a highly modified form, participated in a Formula One race. After that season, the turbocharged era definitively established itself, completely displacing naturally aspirated engines from the highest division of motorsport. Of course, in 1989, the FIA banned turbocharged engines, but the naturally aspirated engines that returned were already V10s and V12s, much more complex and technologically advanced units. The legendary DFV, despite its incredible longevity and adaptability, finally passed into history, leaving behind not just a list of 155 victories, 12 drivers' championships, and 10 constructors' championships, but an entire era that changed Formula One forever. Its decline was inevitable, but its legacy, eternal. The engine that left behind not just numbers, but an entire era that changed motorsport forever, is none other than the Ford-Cosworth DFV V8, and the scale of its impact is truly astonishing. Imagine 155 victories in Formula One Grand Prix races. 155. This is an absolute, unsurpassed record, making it the most successful engine in the history of royal racing. To these incredible 155 victories, add 12 drivers' championship titles and another 10 for constructors. Such figures don't just speak of dominance, they scream it, elevating the DFV to an unreachable pedestal. Neither before nor after it has any power unit come close to such scope and duration of success. For almost 2 decades, from its debut in 1967 to its last victory in 1983, the DFV was synonymous with speed and reliability, allowing both factory giants and small private teams to fight for victories and titles. But even the greatest reigns come to an end, and technological progress is relentless. By 1989, when Formula One completely abandoned turbocharged monsters, returning to naturally aspirated engines, the once innovative DFV, despite its legendary longevity, had become technologically obsolete for the realities of modern Formula One. The era of naturally aspirated V10s and V12s, which brought with it new horizons of power, efficiency, and sophisticated engineering, definitively pushed the legendary V-shaped 8 into the background. These new engines, developed using advanced materials, complex electronic control systems, and digital design technologies, were capable of delivering significantly more power with better fuel economy and less weight than their predecessors. The DFV, however ingenious it was, could not compete with these power units, which represented the next stage of evolution. Its decline was not a sign of weakness, but a natural step in the rapidly developing world of high technology. However, to call it obsolete in a derogatory sense is not merely to distort history, but to ignore the very essence of its enduring greatness. Its obsolescence was a natural stage in the sport's development, not a sign of its imperfection. On the contrary, the Ford-Cosworth DFV was far more than just an assembly of parts and pistons converting fuel into speed. It was a symbol, multifaceted and powerful, a symbol of innovation. Recall how Keith Duckworth, against much advice and tradition, settled on a 90-degree V8, creating not just an engine, but a full load-bearing chassis element, the so-called stressed member. This was a revolutionary step in the late 60s that freed designers from the need to build heavy frames around the engine, allowing teams like Chapman's Lotus, and then all others, to create significantly lighter, stiffer, and more compact cars. The DFV changed the very architecture of Formula One racing cars, setting a trend for decades to come. It was a symbol of accessibility and the democratization of the sport. When Ford made the unprecedented decision to sell the DFV to other teams, setting the price at just $7,500, it instantly opened the doors to Formula One for everyone. This allowed a whole host of private teams, the so-called garagistas, and young talents to break into the elite, making the starting grid incredibly diverse and competitive. Imagine the scene in 1973, when at the British Grand Prix, all cars on the starting grid were equipped with a Ford-Cosworth DFV. This absolute, now unthinkable domination, a direct consequence of its accessibility, reliability, and phenomenal performance. The DFV created a golden age of Formula One, where the talent of the driver and the genius of the chassis designer could triumph even without enormous factory budgets. And of course, the DFV was a symbol of pure, undeniable dominance. From Jim Clark's debut victory at the 1967 British Grand Prix, in only the DFV's second race, to Michele Alboreto's final triumph at the Detroit Grand Prix in 1983, every kilometer of these races was written by its roar. It is an engine that brought victories for almost 2 decades, shaping entire generations of racers and fans. It became the foundation for legendary teams like Tyrrell, Williams, Brabham, McLaren, and of course, Lotus, who used it as the basis for their championship ambitions. The Ford-Cosworth DFV V8 is not just a legend, it's a cornerstone of motorsport. Its impact on Formula One and other series, including the DFX's dominance in IndyCar, cannot be overstated. It not only won countless races and titles, but also inspired an entire generation of engineers, changed the rules of the game, and forever enshrined itself in the pantheon of the greatest technological achievements in sports history. Its legacy is truly eternal, and its story is a tale of how one engine managed to change the world of racing forever. It was a titan whose echo still resonates on racetracks worldwide. So, before us was not just the story of an engine, but a saga of how engineering genius and the courage to change the rules of the game can overturn an entire world. The Ford-Cosworth DFV V8 was more than steel and RPMs. It became a symbol of accessibility, innovation, and uncompromising domination, forever rewriting the laws of Formula One. Its triumphs and ultimately its decline remind us, even the greatest creations are subject to the laws of evolution. But if progress inevitably displaces even the greatest achievements, what truly defines an eternal legacy? And can we, in our own aspirations, create something that, like the DFV, doesn't just achieve success, but changes the very essence of what we touch? What do you think about this titan of motorsport and its lessons? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that change the world.